Welcome to everybody, students in Environment 495, and also to any of you who are watching on YouTube. I am Professor Gary Handwerk, and I am the director of the University of Washington program on the environment. I would encourage any of you who are in the class to turn your screens on. It's a much more vivid and lively sort of activity if we can actually see your faces. I really regret that we can't see you in person, at least at this point in this quarter. I look forward kind of desperately at this point to the point when we can actually encounter you as human beings. I'm really excited to open this autumn 2021 series of talks hosted by the program on the environment, focusing this fall on Indigenous perspectives on the environment. Tim Billow, my colleague in POE, is co-organizing this series, which will be meeting regularly on Wednesdays at 4:30 through December 8th. Further information and links are available on the POE website. A reminder for students in the class that you can find the prompt for your weekly reflective responses in the module section of Canvas, or under assignments, or under discussions, which is to say, basically, you can't miss it, but get in touch if you can't find it. I want to begin tonight, like all of our sessions, with the University of Washington Tribal Land Acknowledgement. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We are both honored and grateful to have with us as lead-off speaker in this series, a longtime UW community member, Iisaaksiichaa Ross Braine, a citizen of the, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Iisaaksiichaa, the Apsaalooke or Crow Nation. Iisaaksiichaa has held more roles and been engaged in more activities than I can begin to recount. He was, until recently, the UW Tribal Liaison and director of the wǝtë-øbʔaltxৱ, the intellectual house on the UW campus, after having played a key role in the creation of that site. He's received, among other honors, the UW Distinguished Staff Award, as well as the Information School's Distinguished Alumni Award, recognizing his powerful impact on campus and beyond as activist and advocate, not only for Indigenous issues and people, but for equity and inclusion anywhere. We have an hour. I'm going to turn it over to you, Iisaaksiichaa, at this point. Welcome. We look forward to hearing from you.
Wow. Yeah, I always forget about all of the stuff that we've accomplished as a team and as a community at the University of Washington. Thank you for that amazing introduction. And yeah, it's been a heck of a week, hasn't it, folks? This is like our first full week just happened of school. I say we because, as Gary said, I'm also now in a PhD program. So I've had lots of roles here at the UW. I've been here as a student, a founding member of a fraternity, director, builder of wǝtë-øbʔaltxৱ, and a few other things. But today, one of my greatest things is that I have my two babies that are just right on the other side of the screen. So if you hear screaming, it's a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old, and they're probably fighting. So just so everybody can know. If the sound cuts out, just let me know. Just give me a sign. The one I see right in front of me is Bella. That's who I see most. So Bella, I'm watching you. If the sound cuts off, you let me know. Okay. Well, where should we start, folks? I have a presentation that I've created over the years, but I'm also really curious and excited to personalize this presentation. What we're going to really talk about is supplemental government-to-government training, tribal sovereignty, and a lot of other stuff. If we don't want to do that, we can just have a conversation. So don't put it in chat because I won't read chat. It throws me off of my flow, but just let her rip. So if there's anything specifically that you'd like to know, why don't we go ahead and start it now, and then I'll move it as we go. Just dive right in.
Maybe like since this is sort of hosted by the program on the environment, like the relationship between Indigenous rights and environmental issues, and then also like what happens to environmental issues when we forget about Indigenous rights.
That's perfect. Thank you. Was that Alicia?
Yeah, that's me.
I've known Alicia for a while, so Alicia, you're going to hear some of the same stuff.
I'll listen to you like read your grocery list, honestly.
Any more? I'm actually writing down old school. So what else do we got?
And add questions in chat if you want at any point. Tim is monitoring that and we'll pull those out. So keep communicating there.
I would just really like to hear more about land sovereignty for Indigenous people and how like some approaches for that land sovereignty when we're addressing environmental issues, like some strategies that are typically used.
Perfect. Strategies for land sovereignty. Well, good. I guess for this conversation, we'll steer clear of really what the land acknowledgement says. This is mostly what this training is about, honoring place. It's about where we are, on whose land, and of course, everything is under debate, right? And so I don't know all the answers. I am also not a local citizen. My tribe is from Montana. And so I come in this as a community member, but also external community, an uninvited guest here in Coast Salish territories. And that might be what some of you are thinking is like, how can we do this work when we're uninvited guests? And so when I'm telling you, you see that make it a little bit easier rather than saying I'm occupying. How am I here as an uninvited guest? So we'll keep on going if there's any more, or we can focus on that.
Hey, Jason.
What up? Nicole, your sound's
sorry.
off.
Sorry.
Zoe?
Hi, I would also love to learn about your experience as being in a tribe and the Indigenous perspective as someone who is not within that community. And also, since we're touching on land acknowledgements, I know the University of Washington does have a land acknowledgement, but it has no action after that. So I recognize that some organizations within UW or classes will just state the land acknowledgement without addressing what they're going to do about it, like really processing what they're saying. So I wanted to see what your response to that is and what actions you further want to see from us.
Okay. Well, this is the best part. I wrote it. And so we could talk about it as a process. We could talk about it as the most times I've ever been cussed out in my life. So maybe we should just do the presentation, huh, folks? Although my paper hasn't been published yet, I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to go for it. Okay. All right. So good questions again. I think Tim or Gary is going to be watching the stuff there, your questions, and we'll dive right in. I'm going to start screen share. And so here we go. Let's see here. Of course, I got a new laptop now. So, okay. So can we see it? Can we just see? Okay.
Yep.
So there we go. So what we're talking about, and you'll probably see your faces on the side and I'll be looking at you. Mia and Zoe are the ones that I see, and Gary. So basically, this is the very beginning of our conversation right there. So you see, those are some of the titles I had all at the same time. And I like to remind folks of that because like here on this screen, I represent 1% of a population in a country where we were 100%. And just like everything else, we have to do everything, right? We have to be Jack or Jill of all trades. We have to be good at a lot of stuff and maybe great at one or two, but these are the titles that I had. And now I am just a PhD student and a dad. And so and a spouse. So I am really excited. I have to update my slides here, but we're going to just dive right in. We're going to talk about place. Like what exactly are we talking about? And so just like we talked about with the land acknowledgement, what we're doing is is we're really going to break it down into a law or into laws, break it down into treaties. And so the question about experience being in a tribe and how it would be to work with the tribe, land sovereignty, some strategies, what happens when we forget to include native rights, and of course the land acknowledgements. We're going to touch on all of that right now. And so I'm really excited about this. So we're going to start with the Declaration of Independence. We're going to go through the Point Elliott Treaty, executive orders and what those mean. And then if we have time, we'll talk about the Washington Attorney General informed consent for tribes. You're probably saying, well, that's a lot of Western ideologies and ways of being, and you would be correct. I'm not going to talk stories because I'm being recorded and I don't like being recorded, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that I keep it pretty vanilla right now. This stuff, like I said at the very beginning, is not published yet, and so you take it as you will. Ready? All right, let's go. So this is really what we're talking about, right? We're talking about tribal, what a federal framework for tribal relations. What does that mean? So a lot of times folks have questions and they always look at me and they say, well, you guys have casino money, right? Did you go to school for free? And this is where I like to break some of those down, those stereotypes. No, we do not all have casinos. And if we do, not all of us go to school for free. We are working governments, not corporations. However, there are Alaska Native corporations, and I invite you to look up how those are structured. Sea Alaska would be one. There's a whole bunch up in Alaska. We're not an ethnic minority, and I'll break that down for you. What exactly does that mean? That means that my tribe is responsible for setting our own citizenship standards. And I know citizenry has a loaded meaning to it, but for us, we're going to talk about being in a tribe, not a member, but a citizen. And because of our rights, our treaty rights, executive orders, acts of Congress, and judicial decisions, Initiative 200, which effectively got rid of affirmative action in the state of Washington, does not affect me, my children, my family, and other Native folks, because the state laws cannot unrecognize federal law. Okay, we're going to get into all of that. And so this is a really good time. And even though we're being recorded, I know that some of us have questions. Maybe in chat, you throw a chat up there that you may want to ask about anything. No, I don't wear moccasins. I don't live in a teepee. I wear them when I dance, and I live in a teepee in the summertime. That's my regalia behind me. I went to the UW. I speak a forced language. What else? Ask away. These are where I really like to answer questions that you may think be stereotypical. And if we're too shy, you can type them. And if not, we'll just keep on going. Keep going. Okay, we're flying. Mia, I know you're getting a kick out of this, huh? There we go. And also, I should probably have said, I'm not from Seattle, right? I'm not from this area. I don't have the Seattle freeze. I'm not fake nice. I am very forward. I am kind, but I'm not nice. So I kind of feel like I'm more of the East Coaster here. So sorry, not sorry. So we're going to dive right in here. And so did anybody know that there's a specific mention of natives in the Declaration of Independence? Did you know that? A lot of folks don't, and that's okay. That's fine. But we do all know that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, right? We know that part. And for those of you who are international, you'll learn it today. And this is how it works. So the Declaration of Independence signed in what was always under contention too, July 4th, 1776. And in there actually is mention of us, as I've said. And so this part is where you're like, oh, I didn't realize that. But onto page 3, you can see there is one right here. This is our mention. We are merciless Indian savages, right there. That's the foundational document, folks. I am not making this up. I am not rewriting history or whatever folks like to say about me when I do my work. It's right there. This United States were built on my family's bones on the backs of slaves. And the fact is that's never going to change. That statement is never going to change. Me, my children, my nieces, nephews, family, we are always going to be less than human. And so when you talk about our relationship with the United States government, local governments, municipalities, regional, city, that's where everybody starts. Okay, we are immediately at a deficit because we're less than human. And that's why it's okay for us to be mascots. That's why it's okay to yell all of these stereotypes. That's why it's okay for someone to always come up to me and say, oh, I'm Native too. I'm like, oh, cool, man. Well, which tribe? Like, no. You could tell because I have high cheekbones. That's offensive, folks. I dare you to say that to a Black person or a Latinx person. Call out a stereotypical facial feature of another minoritized people and see what happens. I wish you would. You understand? But we, having been so small, we're like, well, we just take it. But we're not going to take it anymore. And that's why I'm here to talk about these things today. So that's where we are with the Declaration of Independence. We move a little further on and we get to that point where we get to the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. Does anybody know what happened and how long it took for that declaration to be ratified? Does anybody know? Go ahead and put it in chat real quick. I wish I had built a poll. I know, I bet you all didn't think you were going to learn history today, right? I don't remember either. I'm going to say 1783. Let's just say that. So the United States said, we're independent of the United Kingdom. We are now our own country. And it took, 7 to 8 years after that in order to be ratified and recognized as a sovereign country. So other countries had to recognize the sovereignty of the United States. And boom, the United States existed, right? The same thing happened when the United States signed treaties with us. By doing so, the United States recognized the sovereignty of tribal nations within the territorial boundaries of what are now the United States, excluding most Alaska Native peoples and our Kanaka families in Hawaii, right? Even though in Hawaii they had a fully functioning monarchy. It's interesting how that works, right? So, the United States is recognized. The United States signed treaties with us. And then right there, you can actually see this is one of a few treaties that were signed in the territorial region that is now Washington, Oregon territory. And you can see the names right at the top, right? You see Duwamish, you see Suquamish, you see where it was signed at Mukilteo, which is now Mukilteo. This treaty was signed almost exactly where the new ferry terminal is up in Mukilteo, for those of you who know the region. You see there's some more tribes on there that aren't independently recognized, right? Some of these tribes have been absorbed into other tribes and some have been able to maintain their sovereignty. I will never say that a tribe is gone or erased because that's not true. A lot of times we were pushed into different regions and forced to join other tribes. For example, the treaties, the land acknowledgement statement says Muckleshoot, Tulalip, and Suquamish nations. So if you go to the Muckleshoot's website, go to their own websites. You don't take my word for it. The Muckleshoot will say we are Upper Puyallup and Duwamish, right? And a few other of those tribes will say that the Duwamish are a part of it. I'm not here to recognize or unrecognize people's sovereignty. That's not my job. That's not my right. That's not my business, right? I am just here to function within the boundaries of our legal statuses, which is really hard to do because my name, Iisaaksiichaa, is a language that's not really recognized in the United States, although it was here before this one was. There's a lot of stuff that comes when you talk about decolonization of research methodologies and stuff. I digress. So you go down the treaties, right? You can see where folks were and all the stuff, and you can actually see the signatories here. You can see there's Siaktuk Seattle, chief of the Duwamish and the Suquamish tribes. You can see a lot of other folks like Snoqualmie are not independently recognized right now by themselves. And so I would recommend to you to go and see why these folks represent two. As I've learned, again, it's not my history, as I've learned, Chief Seattle was Duwamish on one parent side, and on the other parent side is Suquamish. In these United States, we're so forced to pick one tribe, even though we represent many different nations. Like myself, I am Apsaalooke, but I'm also Tsitsistas. I am also Lakota. I am also Nakota. But I am forced to choose just one for enrollment purposes. However, I identify with all of those nations 100%, right? That's called maximum representation, especially for those of our people that are on this call or watching at home, where you might be mixed race, Latinx, Native, white, Black, however we've been mixed. You represent 100% of each one of your ethnicities, right? And that's important. And that's how we build off of things here. So now you got the quick treaty. Hey, can you guys put your headphones on, please? Sorry, the headphones came off. It's on video. So we get further down, and we get the United States Constitution, Article 6, Clause 2. And in that article and clause, it elevates treaties and our rights above all state laws, right? So even though state laws like Initiative 200 or Initiative 1000, which passed but didn't pass, I don't know how it works, they'll have no jurisdiction over my sovereignty. My treaty is with the United States government via the state of Montana, not the state of Washington. So when that passed, it doesn't affect us. But universities, companies, corporations, governments will consistently tell us they can't serve us pointedly because there is Initiative 200, which is bullshit. You know, it's a lie. And it's just a way of saying, we don't want to serve you because we want to treat everybody the same, which is total bullshit. And I just want to say it on record, okay? Because it's bullshit. You go further along and you get into the 24 United States Code, subsection 450A, which is about the Indian Trust Doctrine. Indian Trust Doctrine, I'm just going to paraphrase it real quick, is what the government promised us for our land, right? That includes healthcare, which is horrible. It includes education, which I have to pay for. It includes all of these things, and we're supposed to be trained so that we can take care of our land, take care of our people, take care of our society with all of the support of the United States government. So what that means is that not just vocational or animal husbandry or anything like that, not just the farm, but we're talking about now data science, medical science. We're talking about real cutting edge things that the Indian Trust Doctrine is supposed to cover. Of course, not everything is supported, and that's just the way it goes sometimes, but we're working on it. Our treaty rights are constantly under siege and under pressure, okay? So you can see this next slide. It's very heavy, right? I don't use genocide lightly. I don't use genocide. I don't know how else to say it. I say it with the utmost respect. And for those who come from genocide and for those who are survivors of, I just want to make sure that you're aware we're going to touch on some very heavy subjects, okay? Okay, all right. So what happened once we signed these treaties? We were forced to go to our reservations, right? Or to a designated area. Once we were placed there, I'm really specifically talking about the Apsaalooke at this point, or the Plains people. Our warrior deeds were discouraged. Warrior deeds could be wrestling on a weapon away from somebody. It could be stealing a horse. It could be leading a successful war party. It could be touching coup and counting coup on somebody. None of the war deeds have to do with death. You know, that's one thing there's always a misconception that we were these violent, bloodthirsty, merciless Indian savages. But what we were is we like to shame each other. You can look at other folks. We do it today. We'll do it gambling and we'll make fun of each other. It's so unhealthy, but it's kind of fun. I don't know. I hate to say that, whatever. And then finally, we all know about the buffalo extermination. Lots of us have seen Dances with Wolves, and I think that's kind of where most folks see like the devastation, but those were real, man. There was like just people just come through and kill everything. And what that is, of course, that's a genocidal practice because that is removing people's foodstuffs, a source of food, source of clothing, how everything we needed on that beach was wasted, you know, and that's a genocidal practice, which was perpetuated by the United States government, right? Further on, we know disease and famine. Unfortunately, most of you probably know about smallpox, right? And maybe, just maybe, there was some jokes being thrown around about sharing smallpox blankets with folks. And also, that shit ain't funny either. You know, that really affected us. That affected our people. And there are those historical traumas. And now I've been learning more about the genetic traumas that are passing down, right? We're in a pandemic right now, folks. You know, like, these aren't new things. We are just now having to relive some of these terrible things. And so trust me, I know this is heavy, but there is hope. I have hope, okay? These ones are the hardest, all right? So a lot of folks know about the Trail of Tears, right? Y'all know about the Choctaw, the Cherokees, the Comanches. There's a lot of people that were displaced from the East Coast and forced westerly. That happened in 1830. And what happened in 1830 is that we were put on these reservations, and many times, more often than not, we were either put next to or mixed in with our most violent enemies. You know, we were put together with people, they hoped, the United States government hoped that we would kill each other off. But then you have beautiful outcomes. Instead of making war, we made babies. And I am one of those babies. That's why I said I'm Crow, I'm Cheyenne, I'm many different types of the Sioux Nation. That's what happens, you know, and we made lots of babies. And that's why we now make up 1.8%, or 1.8 million of the population in the United States. And even though we make up 30% of the murdered and missing women. That's some pretty heavy duty numbers, folks. 1.8 million out of how many millions, and we make up 30% of the missing or murdered. That's the new way of killing us off. Boarding schools. Boarding schools were by large one of the most damaging, besides displacing us and removing us from our land and removing us from access to our traditional territories. And that kind of ties into the question that Alicia had, is like, what happens when we forget to include Native rights, right? Like, this is it. We no longer have access to all of our traditional land. We don't have access to all of our traditional medicinal sites because, one, it's privately held, or two, a building is sitting on it. I live at the top of the lake, and we know for a fact that the city hall here was built on top of a traditional Stoapsh longhouse. It's called Tuatapie. We know that. But the fact is now it's under a structure that we expect to hopefully stand for 50 years, right? Who knows which ancestors are there still? Who knows what ancestral pieces that we could have, or some really important scientific tools of traditional knowledge are buried underneath these buildings. Boarding schools, right? We all know about that. It wasn't just our people. We know that it happened in First Nations. We saw the reckoning happen this summer, right? With the school at Kamloops. We've seen the reckoning happen at Carlisle in Pennsylvania. We've seen these things. We've known about them, and it's just now coming out. Our children were taken from us on September 30th, which is the Orange Shirt Day. Look it up. The Orange Shirt Day was when churches or missionary groups would come and remove children from their parents by force without permission and take us to a boarding school where we would be beaten for speaking our language. We would be forced our hair to cut off. We were forced to wear Western clothing, and any exhibit of our culture was paid with in slaps, pains, and beatings. When you talk about genocide, I'm talking about forced cultural assimilation. You know, that's what I'm talking about with boarding schools. And that's what I'm talking about, genocidal practices perpetuated by the United States government. I don't want to go over time, but I want to talk about the Dawes Act, which basically reversed all of the work of creating our reservations, because now the United States government wanted it, right? That's where we get those cool names like Boomer Sooner. For those of you who went to the University of Oklahoma, That's a really jacked up thing. Like, oh man, so my school is named after people that cut the line and then stole the land and displaced more native. That's where your school is. You know, I don't apologize. It ain't mine. Mine's named after a slave owner, Washington. Then we go further on, you got the Indian Relocation Act of 1956. That's why there's so many natives in Seattle. Seattle was one of those relocation sites where the United States government said, hey, come to these cities, you folks from the reservations, come here and get trained, do some vocational training, come and do, you know, something else to get out of your deep what's the word I'm trying to say? Sorry, my baby's yelling at me too. So, you know, come and get out of your poverty. And when we got to these places, a lot of times there was no jobs. You know, we were just placed into ghettos essentially, and then say we had to get jobs. And what happened because of that Relocation Act is lots of connections to our tribal communities was severed because now we couldn't go home, or people had forgotten about us. And that's why it takes a lot of work for us to stay reconnected to our people. Even though we have internet, we have Facebook and all of these things, it's still really hard to connect to your people. And so this was just another part of the Indian termination policy of the United States to displace us more and to Americanize the Indians. Take a breath. You know, that's hard. It's hard. I've done this presentation 15, 20, 30 times. This part's never easy, you know? It's not anger, it's just exhaustion. You know, it's exhaustion. How many times have you, and now I'm looking at you students, is how many times have you had to explain yourself, right? How many times you have to explain your gender, your orientation, your sexuality? How many times you have to explain where you come from? This is what it is, right? This is what it is, but every single day. That's been my job as a tribal liaison, is to prove my Indianness. So now we're going to bring it back. Now we're going to talk about hope. So the Indian Reorganization Act was just the way it sounds. It was a chance for us to reorganize, to get back into leadership. But here's the thing, is a lot of us who rewrote our constitutions, of course, follow the United States Constitution, which is why we now have issues with blood quantum, proving again how Indian you are based on an imaginary blood quantum, right? I like to break it down, like when I was talking to folks about coming up to people and saying, oh, I have, you know, Indian blood in me because I have cheekbones and my hair is straight or my skin is brown or whatever. I am 1/16 white. You know what I'm saying? What right do I have to talk about that ethnicity? I got about 1/16 of it to talk about. You see what I'm saying? It's the same as somebody comes to me and like, oh yeah, my great-great-grandmother. I'm like, oh, are you connected to that people? And maybe this sounds standoffish, but this is how it is, right? Because I have to prove it. Those two over there have to prove it. Show me. Explain to me how. Show me how you're connected to our peoples. The Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. We were right there. We were right there next to everybody. We were taking over. We were fighting. I hate to say it, but there's this really, really funny drunk history on the takeover of Alcatraz. It's pretty funny. I recommend checking it out. It's pretty good. But we were there for the takeover of Alcatraz, the takeover of Fort Lawton, which is in Seattle, which is now where our United Indians of All Tribes Foundation is. We were right there with the Black students. We were there with the Latinx students, the Asian students, Pacific Islander students, all of us, the women, everybody that was there. We were all together. The Self-Determination Act was pretty massive, actually. That was one of the biggest ones. So I leave it last, even though it came before the Religious Freedom Act of 1978. Self-Determination Act at this point was where we had the capacity to go for grants, federal grants. So for those of you who are interested in working with tribes or experience of being in a tribe but living in this Western world, this is where that rubber really meets the road. If you work for a tribe, you're going to learn we can go after our own federal grants, which is amazing, right? So we can go after these federal grants, Department of Housing and Urban Development, USFS, all of these things, right? And we can say, we want the money, and then we have the capacity and the ability to work those and run those funds as we see fit. That's pretty amazing. That's what self-determination allowed to do, is us to go after grants and then spend the money as we saw fit, as we see fit. There's a lot more to it, and I am speeding it up. I can see that we want to get through this stuff. But then I bring up the Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978 because when we have students that want to practice a traditional way of being, traditional medicine, or spiritualism, or religion, however they identify it for themselves, this is always being stepped on. Because if we want to burn in the dorms, for you students who are in the dorms, you know that you signed that paper that said that you couldn't burn, right? No candles, no incense, right? Well, that's what we need. That's what we use. That's what we are legally protected and allowed to do. And to have a sign, a piece of paper that says we're disallowed from doing that is illegal. You know, they would never tell folks to take off their khatta. They would never tell folks to take off a burqa, and they should not be able to. However, we are ones, we have to email our classmates. We have to email our RA. We have to email our roommates when we want to practice our traditional way. Does that sound right? That's today, folks. I have to deal with this every single year. Well, not anymore because I'm in school now. But I opened this up so I could see more of your faces, and, you know, like, and just kind of get a judgment call to see how you all thought about that. So now we're in federal recognition. You heard me say that that's not my right, and the University of Washington, it's not their right. It's nobody's right except the tribe and the United States government, which is exciting because who is our Secretary of the Department of the Interior? Do what's up. Can you
Deb Holland.
It's Deb Holland, yes. And who is Deb Holland? If you're in forestry, you should probably learn her. Deb is the first American Indian in the cabinet ever. You know, since 1783, folks, to 2020, 2021. You know, she's the first. You know, it's crazy, but it's her responsibility now to deal with recognition. All right. So that's where the Department of the Interior is, which makes no sense because you think it should be a legal status. However, the Bureau of Indian Affairs is under the Department of the Interior, just like Bureau of Land Management, I think USDA. I mean, y'all folks probably know better than me who's under there. USFS? Am I blowing smoke now, Gary? I can't remember.
The National Park Service is,
There's,
but the Forest Service is USDA.
there we
But,
go.
yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Tim. But see, like, that's the responsibility that Deb has now. And so now you can actually look at these petitions here. The reason I wrote Snohomish tribe is because we were kind of advising the University of Washington. Bothell is in that real interesting place, just like Seattle. Like, it could be one tribe or it could be the other. And I'm not going to say which ones because I don't want to deal with it anymore. So 2 tribes that are fairly recognized are fighting for it. We'll leave it at that. However, you can look at those links. So you see those links right there. This will show you where the processes are. So this one from Indians.com talks about the process. The Seattle Times shows a little bit more information. And right here, this is the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs.gov, that talks about the actual where they are in the process. Okay. And so Deb, as the first Native woman in charge of a cabinet, Department of Interior specifically, this falls under her. And then so finally, folks will say, why aren't the Duwamish a part of this? And again, it's not my responsibility, but let's see, I think I forgot it on this slide. So anyway, sorry, if you go to this BIA, I'm sorry, I got to the wrong one for you, but if you go to this BIA, this file here, this PDF, it should also have access to the Duwamish. It should have access to the other tribes that are fighting for recognition here in the United States, or here in the state of Washington: the Stilikum, the Snohomish, the Chinook, the Marietta Band and Nooksack Indians, the Snoqualmie, and the Kikialis. Those 7 tribes are fighting for recognition, and they're in various stages of recognition, or unfortunately, like the Duwamish were in final remand in 2015, that they will not be recognized. I'm not going to discuss it. It's not my business. You can say whatever you want, but the tribes will disagree with you when you say the Duwamish. Again, it's not my responsibility, and I don't care, right? I'm just following the rules. I'm just following the steps and the guidance that I have, okay? So that's why now, when you hear that land acknowledgement statement, it says Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot, or whatever variation of it is. I forgot, I wrote it years ago. That's why it's written in that manner, okay? Unfortunately, it is very Western, but now you know that the history is gross. It's painful. It's legal. It's legally ambiguous and about as clear as mud, right? So now we got through that. Right here, you can see these are some of the research methodologies that we created at the Information School through the iNative Research Group. We have not published this as well. I need to also preface that. If it's on the recording, this is not available yet, but these are just some of the processes we put forth. I'm going to go through it quick. You can probably screen share it later. But these are the checklists that I created for working with tribes. So this might be something interesting for you students who want to work with tribes, or to their professors, because Tim and Gary and I have talked about this a lot. This is actually, I should say, it's more of a flow chart. So for those of you who do project management, this is more like the waterfall, right? Do this, and then this, and then this, because it makes the most sense. Do you see how I put that in orders? IRB from the University of Washington, because according to the HSPP, Human Subjects Protection Program, Natives are now a part of vulnerable population status. Engage UW tribal relations, not me anymore. I don't know who it is yet. Then be present. Be present just means show up, go to a clan, go to a coast jam, or go to a basketball tournament, be involved with the community, because that's how you know who you are. And then when you're at those community events, you can build that support and partnership. You can actually talk about your research and what you've been doing at the UW. Then you should get approval from the tribal leadership group of that tribe and get tribal IRB. This is new, folks. If you're going to do research with a tribe, many tribes in our region have their own IRB. IRB, I just did some training on it. I don't want to talk about it anymore, but you can go look it up yourself. Then you should sign an MOU. You should also get letters of support from the tribe. Then, only then do you apply for the grant. Because so many times, people come to me after they write the grant and they say, we got this money, we want to work with the tribe. And I'm like, do you have a letter of support? Do they know who you are? Like, what are we going to get out of it, man? We could do this ourselves, We don't need this. We can get our own grants. And there's the last one. That's the part that makes people pucker up pretty tight, is give the data back. It's ours. It's our data, right? It's our stories. It's our history. It's our land. You can't have it, right? I did research with the tribe, and I followed these steps. And when I signed the MOU that said, I will give their data back and I will get a master's degree, it was a good deal. And they used it to work with to make some lawsuits happen. So yay, I helped some tribes get some money from some lawsuits. So who knows what the outcome will look like. And with that, I think we're done. I think I got through it. Let's see here. Oh yeah, now what? Hey, there was the question, right? I think folks that thought that's the land acknowledgement, right? Like, now what? We do the land acknowledgement. Now what are we going to say? Well, now you know what the statement is, right? Now you know why the University of Washington statement is as it is, and it's because it was done in tribal consultation. I went to every single tribe and talked to them about it. Even the tribes who is not from this region, I talked to them. 35 federally recognized tribes and 7 unrecognized. Like, I went to everybody. And so that's why we do that line acknowledgement in that way, but it's not my way. So that's another thing, is you can go to these other tribes and they have their own way of doing stuff. And in fact, if you're looking to how to do a land acknowledgement presentation, Polly Olson, who was a Yakima Nation citizen, did this really amazing land acknowledgement checklist at the Burke Museum. And so I'd say go ahead and check that out because Polly has done an amazing job. And so that's a really good way to do it. Let's see here. What next? Oh, give the land back. That's the next part. I don't know how many of you have started to watch that cartoon called Up North or The Great North or something like that. Has anyone seen it yet? It's this cartoon. I don't know. I love it. But they do a land acknowledgement on this cartoon. It's hilarious. And he goes, land acknowledgements are great, but we could just give it back. I'm like, oh my God, that's so perfect. I love that a cartoon was just so clear on it. So I would have to like get a clip of that and share with it. There are ways to give it back. You can donate it back to the tribe. You can help with rent. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do. And once you do the acknowledgement, you know what I've seen really amazing presenters go, do the land acknowledgement. You know, we acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land which touches the shared waters of the Tulalip of all tribes and bands within the Muckleshoot, Tulalip, and Suquamish nations. Now you know the treaty rights behind that statement. And the reason why we wrote shared waters is because of DAPL. DAPL really said, you know, water showed that waters were connecting us. And I saw the tribal chair for Suquamish, his name is Leonard Forsman, said something about shared water. And I was like, that's so amazing. Like, that's a really good way of saying, rather than dividing us, like, what is the thing that ties us together? And it's water, right? We all know, like, we all say water is life. And so that's why that water part, the tribes and bands, that was my way of trying to add unrecognized peoples at the time into the statement, but also recognizing that these tribes are not the Tulalip. You know, they are the Snohomish, the Snoqualmie, the Skykomish, and other allied tribes and bands. That's from their website, folks. I'm not making that up. There's more than one tribe in many of these nations, and that's why we say nations. So that's next. And so what I've seen presenters really do is read that statement and say, now let that sink in. What does that mean to you? Like, what does a land acknowledgement mean? And as I said it clearly, but it was so fast, that's not my way. That's not how I was taught. So I've also had to learn it, but I like it. And then I like to do it when I go to other people's territories. But a lot of times you get in trouble, right? Like, oh, you said the wrong tribe. Well, hell, how do I know? I'm trying to figure it out on the fly. So that's why the statement that we created at the UW, the one on the Tribal Relations website, is the only one. And I'll put that on YouTube. It's the only one that had tribal consultation. So when other folks go and they put theirs together and they make it really extra flowery and stuff, get out of here, man. Like, they didn't do consultation. We did consultation. You know, like, that's what I need to remind folks of, is that that work is not just done in a void. It has to be done with community. There are rules, there are guidelines to work with our people. And so that's what I've seen people say really good with land acknowledgement. And if somebody watches this emails later, I don't care. I don't want to read your email when it comes to your recognition. Just know that I did it and I know. You could tell I like a fight. Fighting's my jam. You know, like, we got these scars here from fighting, and so I'll do it again. But now that I'm a PhD student, I can say whatever the hell I want. So with that, questions?
Thanks, Iisaaksiichaa. Let me suggest anybody who has a question, you might put your hand up, icon, and he can call on you if you have a question you want to ask right now. Ashlyn, I see a hand up, a physical hand up. Okay, Ashlyn, go ahead.
Hi. So you've talked a little bit about how exhausting it can be to always be advocating. And so how can, besides like consulting and asking a bunch of questions, how can like non-Indigenous environmental activists kind of support Indigenous rights without putting pressure on the tribes to feel like they have to deal with us all the time?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, so there's a lot of, if you have questions about consultation, the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs, the Department of Interior has those guidelines. So it makes it really easy. If you're working in the environment, you're gonna work with the tribe, you know, whether it's water or fish or land or air or cloud data. in information data, it's going to happen. So that helps a lot, is just to go ahead and assume that you're going to work with a student or with a tribe. I should have also said, I'm a graduate of the College of Forest Resources before it was CEFS. And so that's where I really caught this bug on tribal sovereignty and land. So, I think that's another good thing, is that CEFS and SAFs also have, they have really good relationship with tribes. And so that's another good thing, is you have Tim here, you have Gary, they know how to work with tribes. And so it's taken us time to build that relationship, but that can actually be really helpful, is to just ask your advisors or your professors. They're really good at it too. Okay, I hope that helped.
Zoe was next, I think.
Hi, I apologize if I said something wrong about the land acknowledgement, but yeah, I'm definitely so happy that UW was actually consulting and collaborating with the local Indigenous tribes when creating the land acknowledgement. And I see on the Native Live and tribal relations on the UW site, under Native Life, it says, and I quote, "We also recognize the need to provide guidance for students to find the academic, social, and cultural support system available to them." So that's kind of the action item that UW is stating that they'll take. Do you mind elaborating on what this guidance is, or if there's any specifics?
Yes, so that's a great question. Thank you. And no, the land acknowledgement, I just get hot talking about it because we do it so much. But when it comes to guidance, it could be anything from, like we said, writing a grant to doing outreach or to volunteering. A lot of times our tribes have been asking us, we need students. We want Native students. We want any student that wants to work with us. And so if you're looking for a job, a lot of times we've helped our students in POE, CEF, SAFs, and all the college environment get jobs with tribes. And so that's something that we can do because there's so few of us, right? I'm too small of a butter on too big of a toast. We can't do it all. We try, but there's times when we just need some support. And when I wrote that, that's what I meant.
Love the metaphor. Nicole had a question as well.
Hi, sorry about the yelling my son's name earlier. Second of all, I had two questions. One is, I took a Professor Charlotte Cote's class over the summer, and she's mentioned that she has this vision to have American Indian Studies be a required course for all students in the undergraduate school, everybody in some way. Is there a movement somewhere else that is worked at a public university or even a private one? And then my second question is, with First Nations in Canada up north, are they leading the way? Where with the relationships between sovereign nations and governments? Who are we trying to, replicate in some way, or who's the leader?
Well, good questions, Nicole. I saw your text. No worries. I would love to see American Indian Studies required, because the diversity credit, which was voted on students, by the way, for those of you who don't know and who may why do I have to take a diversity credit? You students decided that. That was not faculty, that was not staff, that was not administrative people, that was you student leaders. And so that's the way we're going to have to do it again. If we're going to have American Indian Studies required, then I think that's what we're going to have to do. Here in the state of Washington, we have House Bill 5433, which requires Native American history to be taught alongside Washington state history. So for those of you who have come through Washington public schools, you were supposed to have had it, but if you didn't, then we know that that's where we really have to start, Nicole, is in the public school system. And folks, for you students who want to support that, contact Chris Reichdahl. Chris Reichdahl is our office of superintendent. He's our superintendent of public instruction. Here, I'll text him later and say he's probably going to get a bunch coming, but Chris needs to know about the school district that you've come from and say, I was not taught Native history, even though it is required by law. It's an RCW, it's a registered codification of Washington, but I always just know it as House Bill 5433. So again, start from K-12, And then we have you student leaders coming in who actually like know what you're talking about and how to push it. Where has this worked before? I'm not sure. I'd actually have to look, because I'm guessing that it has to, if you go to a tribal college university, you probably have to. And so there's 37 in the United States, and they are four-year degree. They give four-year degrees now. And so I guess we could say in those schools, those 37, it's worked perfectly. But I think if we were going to look at just one or two, probably Northwest Indian College up in Bellingham, or Salish Kootenai College over in Montana would probably be the places that have the strongest leadership for that. Public universities, maybe Montana State University or University of Montana, maybe UW-Madison, and UCLA I know has been doing a lot of good work. And so those places probably where I'd look. So that's required. Whereas and who are we emulating? Unfortunately, we're the leads. We do actually, I'll take it back. I would say New Zealand. New Zealand would probably be like the best promising practices. There's no best practices, but there's promising practices. And I would say it's probably in New Zealand, or I always had to say the word, so I apologize for anyone who's Maori watching this. So that's what I'd say is probably New Zealand. Yeah.
We're almost out of time here, but there's been a question in chat that you might at least touch on. Somebody asked about the connection between land sovereignty and food sovereignty. A lot of our students do work on food issues in agriculture. Thoughts about that before we wind up here?
Sure, and I want to go to Maddie too. So Maddie, why don't you go first?
I just had a quick question. Did you know if the education in Washington public school systems came from a law passed, or was it the education board deciding on that? Because I'm from Southern California and we didn't have that in our curriculum, and I think that is a tragedy. So I was just curious.
We're working on California, don't you worry. We're actually working with them. We have this huge group of folks here in the Northwest in Canada, or in California, that work together. So what it was is this tribes led it. So it's tribally led. So we used our sovereignty to push it, because we asked the question, who's paying for French? Who's paying for German? And why is it we want to teach Lushootseed or Sahaptin or any other Ichishkin, other native language? How come we have to pay for it? Do a suck. So that's what I'm saying is, how come we always have to? And that's where the question came, was for language, for early language learners, or early language arts. Yeah.
That's awesome. I hope we can do the same in California.
We've done it in Montana, Wisconsin. There's a few other states that have done it, but for sure. So I want to get to that question. Thank you, Maddie, for that question about food sovereignty and land sovereignty. Those who don't know that we started a native garden in partnership with the Center for Urban Horticulture. And we just had our 4th year growing year. So it's been pretty awesome. But what we said in our MOU there is that we don't want any research on our food people. We don't want anyone to come and touch our stuff. We don't want anyone to study our way of being. And we wrote that very clearly in language for our MOU, our Memorandum of Understanding, because so often our foodstuffs, our food people have been stolen, right? And then turn into big money makers. And we don't want that. We just wanted to make food, and we just wanted to address food insecurities. That's all we wanted to do, was grow food, feed kids or students, and be done. So food sovereignty and land sovereignty are really sticky. And for that question, I would recommend taking a class with Dr. Charlotte Cote. Dr. Cote talks about this extensively. I think her new book is coming out about this specific thing about food sovereignty. And so I think that's really important. But if you look at not just the plant people, but the animal people, then that's where we start talking about co-management, right? For those of you who have learned about that word, co-management. I know you're tired of it, but it's important. It's important for tribes. It's important for our government folks, because we do have legal access and legal rights to hunt these territories. Like the Yakima are supposed to be able to hunt and fish in Cle Elum. Like they're supposed to be, the Nimipu or the Nez Perce are supposed to be allowed to hunt in Yellowstone National Park. There's all of these things because our plant people and our food and our animal people are just as important to the diets that we have. And so if we're not able to co-manage the land, how can we co-manage the plants? How can we co-manage the ungulates? How can we co-manage the fish? This all stuff, all of it ties together. And so land sovereignty and food sovereignty are one and the same, as I would say. I think Dr. Cote would disagree, but that's why you got teachers, you know, and she taught me when we were here. I don't want to put her on blast, but she taught me when I was a student here too for undergrad.
Okay, I think we are at the end of our time. I'm going to ask Sean to go ahead and end the recording at least, which may totally unleash Iisaaksiichaa. I don't know, now that he's not being recorded. He's been so restrained up to this point.